what's up? Sinisa, Super Bad Estrada here, and I just want to give a huge special shout out to the relay. Thank you so much for all of the continuous support, and thank you for all of the support during and after and before every single fight.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Dimitri Salita had this to say. He says, it would be another mega event for women's boxing. Clarissa Shields versus Katie Taylor super fight can happen, says American Stars promoter Dimitri Salita. The two-time undisputed champion Clarissa Shields was quoted as saying, a fight with Katie Taylor is definitely a possibility. Katie is a very good fighter for whom I have a lot of respect for inside and outside of the ring. The ball is in her court. If she wants to do it, it would be another mega event for women's boxing. Shields, who has suggested she will face Katie Taylor at 147 pounds, could attempt to dominate a new weight class after she so collected every belt at middleweight.
And junior middleweight.
I think Katie is like a blessing and a curse for her too, how good she is. But she has one problem. She has a problem with pressure fighters. All her team has to do is acknowledge that, and if she fixes that, then me and her can be in competition about who is pound for pound. But right now, I'm pound for pound best, and Katie Taylor is second. I think that is a matter of opinion. I think that is
Open to debate.
open to discussion, as here at Ring IQ, it's the other way around. Based on the governing criteria that dictates who goes where on a pound-for-pound list, Katie Taylor is ranked at number 1, with Clarissa Shields being ranked at number 2. For those interested in that discussion, I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. Let me tell you something. Taylor versus Shields ain't gonna happen.
It's not.
Not sure, but I believe that the asking price that Clarissa Shields set to move down to 147 pounds to take on Katie Taylor was something to the tune of $500,000.
Or was that for Savannah?
Clarissa was quoted as saying, I got a nice butt, and I will lose that going down to 147. So they, Eddie Hearn and Katie, need to come up with that dough if they want me to drop to 147 to fight Katie Taylor, and that's just it.
What?
They likely don't.
Won't.
They're not the ones asking for this fight.
They're not.
The discrepancy in size between Katie and Clarissa, even at a catch weight of 147 pounds, it's too great.
The fans aren't clamoring for it.
The fans intended to flip the bill for this thing. They're not clamoring for little old Katie Taylor from 135 pounds to take on Clarissa, who debuted at 168.
They're not.
They're not asking for this fight. You know what they are asking for? Taylor versus the winner of Breakus versus McCaskill. Taylor versus Jonas. What would be the sequel to their Olympic rivalry in the pro ranks, as Katie did beat Natasha many years ago, but that was as an amateur.
There's actually a lot more interest in that fight than this fight.
That fight is viewed as a more even contest. There's no discrepancy in size between Katie and Natasha, no discrepancy in age either.
Natasha has captured the hearts and minds of the boxing fans.
With the performance she put on against WBC super featherweight champion at 130 pounds, Terry Harper.
There were more fans asking for that fight than this fight.
So regardless of what asking price Clarissa and Dimitri are setting for a Katie Taylor fight, they're setting an asking price for a fight that neither Eddie Hearn or Katie Taylor is asking for.
For a fight that nobody's asking for.
Nobody's asking Katie Taylor to move up and wait and take on someone as big as Clarissa Shields. The discrepancy in size is just too great between these fighters, and there's never going to be a real middle ground between them, because one of these fighters debuted as a lightweight and the other debuted as a super middleweight. No matter how much weight Clarissa Shields cuts down to, she's never going to stop having a super middleweight frame. She's always going to be the much naturally bigger fighter. Nobody's asking for that fight. What they are asking Clarissa to do is take on Savannah Marshall. With Clarissa Shields having become the undisputed champion in the junior middleweight division, there really is a question as to what's going to happen to those middleweight titles, those middleweight belts.
Currently, Savannah Marshall's the WBO middleweight champion.
It has been revealed that an offer went out to Clarissa Shields for a Savannah Marshall fight, something to the tune of $250,000.
Where she wants $500,000 to $750,000.
That appears to be Clarissa Shields' asking price for that fight. And when I came across this bit of information, I thought to myself, did she get $500,000 to $750,000 to fight either Hannah Gabriels, Marie-Eve Dicaire,
Ivana Habazin?
just any of these other girls that she's fought so far, Tori Nelson, Nikki Adler? Did she get $500,000 to $750,000 to fight any of those other girls? Because if she didn't, It's got me scratching my head as to why she would expect that kind of a price, that kind of a payday for little old Savannah Marshall. You say that Savannah can't fuck with you. That's what you say. But you're asking for a lot more money to fight Savannah than what you just made fighting Marie-Eve DeCaire.
Not against anybody making money.
But there does have to be a reason. It does have to be reconciled why it is Clarissa wants so much more money for a Savannah Marshall fight. Savannah Marshall, who she says can't fuck with her. There's got to be a reason you want so much more money for that fight than any other fight you've had up until this point. There has to be a reason.
You gotta make it make sense.
Well, is it because you won't have home field advantage?
That's the biggest difference.
I mean, let me see if I understand this. What you guys want is for Eddie Hearn to flip the bill. You want your opponent's promoter to finance the fight. Not only do you want your opponent's promoter to finance the fight, you want him to pay you well in excess of what you normally make, what you normally accept to take on a fight.
Why?
You want him to pay you in excess of that.
Are those the kind of paydays Dimitri Salidas providing these other girls?
$500,000 just because you've got to get on a plane. Did Ivana Habazin get $500,000? Because she's from Croatia. Did Christina Hammer from Germany, did she get $500,000? Close to $1 million? What about Marie-Eve DeCaire, who you just fought, who came all the way down from Canada? Did she get $500,000?
For traveling.
Just because she had to board a plane, just because she had to travel for a fight with you.
Did she?
Did you guys compensate those fighters the way that you're demanding compensation for getting on a plane? Because if you didn't, that's a little bit hypocritical, isn't it?
Did you guys send them a counteroffer?
You know, since you're not happy with the $250,000 that Eddie Hearn was willing to put up for you, Clarissa Shields, for her own volition, stated that the people over there at Showtime were going to take her $300,000 purse and cut that in half, cut it down to $150,000 for this Marie-Eve DeCaire fight. And this offer that they say they received from Eddie Hearn is in excess of that. It is in excess of $150,000. $250,000. That wasn't enough, huh?
Make it make sense.
You are willing to fight one opponent for substantially less money than the other. There has to be a reason. I'll tell you that this looks like history is repeating itself. I'll tell you that once Eddie Hearn is involved, everybody gets too good for everything. What these fighters normally accept under normal circumstances suddenly becomes peanuts as soon as Eddie Hearn becomes involved. And with that in mind, I don't even know if we're going to get that Savannah Marshall fight.
Clarissa's supposed to be doing the MMA thing.
These preliminary talks and preliminary figures being thrown around are semblant of what we already saw between Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, and the impression that leaves me with is that this fight between Clarissa and Savannah might go the way that the Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano fight went.
We might not get it.
Even though the Marshall fight is the most sensible and sensical fight for Clarissa at this time. Don't expect to see that fight happen in the near future because it sounds a lot like Dimitri and Clarissa are singing a very familiar tune that we've all heard before. As soon as Eddie Hearn is involved, everybody gets too good for everything, even if it's more than what they normally accept. In junior middleweight news, hooked on home, Spike O'Sullivan had the best year of his life in 2020, even if it took him out of the ring and put him into the kitchen. You know, I came across this article and came across a rather interesting bit of information. It seems that the people over there at Golden Boy Promotions are planning a fight between Spike O'Sullivan, who's returning to junior middleweight, and Brian Castaño, the newly crowned WBO champion. Oscar De La Hoya's Golden Boy are understood to be lining up a bout with WBO 154-pound champion Brian Castaño of Argentina later this year. Spike has a good working relationship with the California outfit, who want to reward him for his entertaining run of fights with a shot at the crown.
Wait a minute.
How does this work? Brian Castaño is a PBC fighter. That's the side of the street he fights on, and even though he did have to cross over for his world title shot, he did have to cross over for his world title opportunity against Patrick Teixeira, who is a Golden Boy Promotions fighter. The feeling was that if Brian won, he'd take that WBO title
Back to PBC Island.
subsequently unify it with the only unified champion in the junior middleweight division, the consensus #1 guy at the weight, Jermel Charlo. That's what the feeling was ahead of this fight and after the fight. Brian Castaño, in so many words, said that he wants that fight. But if this story checks out,
If it does.
what it indicates is that Jermel's not next. Spike O'Sullivan is next. What's going on here? Well, I'll tell you what it could be. You guys will remember that Sergey Kovalev was a top-ranked fighter ahead of the Canelo Alvarez fight. Canelo Alvarez, who then was still in bed with Golden Boy Promotions. As a result of Sergey Kovalev losing that fight, he became a Golden Boy Promotions fighter because Golden Boy Promotions had options on the loser of the match. The loser was Sergey Kovalev. Is it possible that the people over there at Golden Boy created a situation with Brian Castaño to where they'd have options over not only the loser of the match, but the winner as well? That if Brian Castaño, in effect, became the WBO champion, they might have him for at least, 1 or 2 fights? Is that possible?
Maybe.
Perhaps such a clause was incorporated into the contract language of Teixeira versus Castaño because Golden Boy Promotions wanted to cover all the bases. They wanted a plan B in the event that their champion lost the match. Remember, Golden Boy Promotions ain't in the Canelo Alvarez business anymore. This is the same Golden Boy Promotions that just signed Zurdo Ramirez.
They need fighters.
Maybe the people over there at Golden Boy thought it prudent to incorporate options on not just the loser of the fight, but the winner. That if Brian Castaño wins, they get to keep him for at least 1 more or maybe even 2 more fights.
Of course, they need fighters.
And the winner of that fight which just took place between Patrick Teixeira and Brian Castaño, the winner would be an active reigning world champion. Maybe the people over there at Golden Boy Promotions got options on that guy being Brian Castaño, and that's how we can explain what this article is suggesting, that they're lining up Spike O'Sullivan for Brian Castaño. Gotta make it make sense.
It's not like the guys over there at the PBC got a schedule.
I mean, not much in terms of a schedule. We know that David Benavidez, the former WBC super middleweight champion, is going to be returning to action, but what about Marcus Brown? What about Jean Pascal? What about Keith Thurman? It's been close to 2 years since that guy had a fight, and he's got nothing on the horizon. We don't know when Errol Spence Jr. is going to be returning to action. We don't know when Danny Garcia is going to be returning to action. There's a lot of guys over there at the PBC that don't seem to have anything going on, and we're 3 months into the year of 2021. DAZN's got their stuff on the horizon the same way the Top Rank does, but what's the PBC got going on?
Not much.
Maybe this is a situation created by the fact that the PBC ain't got much in terms of fight dates for their own fighters, and Brian Castaño might have walked into a situation where Golden Boy Promotions would have options on him even if he won the fight, even if he became the WBO champion, which he did.
I don't want to see Castaño versus O'Sullivan.
I want to see Charlo versus Castaño. This was actually one of the few instances where I wanted a world title to end up on the PBC side of the street so that we could get that unification match. And I understand that guys being on the same side of the street don't guarantee that they're going to fight. It really doesn't. There's several guys on the PBC side of things that aren't about to fight each other and never have. But I figured, well, maybe that's a step in that direction. Maybe.
This article says otherwise.
This article states that Brian Castaño's very next fight could be against Spike O'Sullivan.
If it is, we can make certain inferences.
As there are certain inferences we can make as to how that would have happened. Why Spike O'Sullivan and not Jermel Charlo? Why DAZN, Golden Boy Promotions, and not PBC and Fox?
I'm just bouncing ideas around.
I'm just trying to make it make sense. But if this story checks out and Brian's next fight is against Spike, and that fight against Spike ends up on the DAZN platform under the Golden Boy Promotions banner, well, we'll have the answers that we're looking for. Golden Boy must have had options on that guy.
How the hell else would you explain it?
And if they do in fact have options on that guy, if that's the way the cookie crumbles, that more or less jeopardizes that Jermel Charlo fight. That Jermel Charlo undisputed junior middleweight title fight. Could take an undisclosed amount of time for that to take place if the people over there at Golden Boy got options on Brian Castaño. And finally, in my previous upload, we talked about the back-and-forth action by way of social media between Gervonta Davis and Regis Prograis, and it actually slipped my mind that Regis does have a fight on the horizon. He does have something coming down the pipeline. It's just not coming by way of the PBC. Regis Prograis is set to make an appearance on Triller against Ivan Redkach, and we actually talked about that in passing here on the channel. And I didn't factor that into the equation that Regis is making an appearance on a non-PBC affiliated platform, and it's not as a result of someone winning a purse bid like it was with Teofimo Lopez and George Kambosos Jr.
It's not.
When Regis Prograis inked that deal with the PBC, it was reported to be a one-fight deal, a one-off, and he's already had that fight.
He has.
So it's quite possible that Regis Prograis here today is a network and promotional free agent.
And he's not tied to anybody.
Which would allow him, in theory, to go anywhere and fight anyone, which explains why he's set to be making an appearance on Triller against Ivan Redkach, of all people. I guess it threw me off that his name was being tacked on to the names of PBC fighters that fight on PBC-affiliated networks like Gervonta Davis, like Adrian Broner. We know that upon signing that deal, that one-fight deal with the PBC, a Broner fight was something that Regis Prograis was broaching. He thought that it was a sizable fight of sizable value. We now know that that fight's not very likely to happen. Better still, it threw me for a loop.
Adrian Bronier doesn't want the fight.
That being said, I still maintain my original position. I still happen to think that Top Rank is a place where perhaps Regis Prograis should consider going, because if he goes there, it will give him access to some of Top Rank's 140-pound fighters, and it could see him becoming a world champion again. We know that very soon, the biggest fight in the 140-pound division is set to go down on ESPN between Jose Ramirez and Josh Taylor, the only two champions at this weight. And perhaps Regis Prograis won't be able to fight the winner of that fight, because the winner of that fight, if they stay at 140 pounds, well, they're going to have to satisfy Jack Catterall, their WBO mandatory challenger, regardless of who wins the fight. Maybe Regis can't get the winner of that fight, but what Regis can do is stick around long enough that he picks up one of those world titles, or two of them, once they become vacant. Because it's conceivable, regardless of who the winner of that fight is, it's not likely they stay in that division for very long.
He might move up and fight Crawford.
I know that Top Rank has been receiving some bad press as a result of how they handled the Teofimo Lopez situation, but what you have to consider is Matchroom doesn't have the inside track on either the 140-pound division or the welterweight division. Now, the PBC does. They do have the inside track on the welterweight division, but what are the odds that Regis Prograis lands himself a fight with an Errol Spence Jr.? He doesn't seem to be having any luck with an Adrian Bronier fight.
Maybe they get him the winner of Ramos versus Figueroa.
But what the hell is fighting the winner of that fight going to do for you? It's going to do for you about as much as fighting Ivan Redkach will. Essentially what I'm getting at is, it could be a long time before Regis Prograis gets to fight for a world title on the PBC side of the street, in spite of the PBC having the inside track on the welterweight division. Whereas if he goes to Top Rank, he stands a good chance of fighting for a title at not only 140 pounds, but 147 as well, because they do still have Terence Crawford.
He'll get a Crawford fight before he gets a Spence fight.
That's why, in spite of the negative press that Bob Arum has garnered as of late for Top Rank, I still think that's a potential destination that Regis Prograis, who could be a network and promotional free agent here and now, I still think that's a potential location that he should consider for his next couple of fights, where he could lock horns with either Ivan Baranchyk, Jose Zapata, Jack Catterall, maybe line himself up for a world title shot at a title that could soon become vacant in the 140-pound division, or shoot for Terence Crawford straight away. He doesn't have a dance partner right now.
It all depends on how active Regis wants to be.
It all depends on how much time he's willing to lose or willing to put to use.